Well, no doubt many of you are wondering why the speaker is so old. Well, the answer is obvious. He hasn't died yet. And why was the speaker chosen? Well, I don't know that either. I'm optimistic about life. If I can be optimistic when I'm nearly dead, surely the rest of you can handle a little inflation. In my life, I try and avoid things that are stupid and evil and make me look bad in comparison with somebody else. Bitcoin does all three. Worthless artificial gold. Bitcoin reminds me of Oscar Wilde's definition of fox hunting, the pursuit of the uneatable by the unspeakable.
Well, that sounds better than what I used before.
I like cryptocurrencies a lot less than you. To me, it's just dementia. And I think the people who are professional traders that go into trading cryptocurrencies, it's just disgusting. It's like somebody else is trading turds and you decide I can't be left out. You don't want to be like the motion picture executive in California, and they said the funeral was so large because everybody wanted to make sure he was dead. And there's a similar story about the minister saying at the funeral, won't anybody stand up and say a good word for the deceased? And there was this long silence, and finally one guy stood up and he said, well, he said his brother was worse. A director getting $150,000 a year from a company who needs it is not an independent director.
They're looking for chihuahuas and not Great Danes. Yeah. And I hope I'm not insulting any of my friends that are on comp committees.
You're insulting the dogs.
No.
I am quite philosophical about my grandchildren not thinking exactly the way I do. I don't like it when they try some other way. And I have to pretend that I like some of the boyfriends and girlfriends I don't like. But I just struggle through like everybody else. And usually I just bite my tongue and keep silent. That's my way of handling it. The general system for money management requires people to pretend that they can do something that they can't do and to pretend to like it when they really don't. I think that's a terrible way to spend your life, but it's very well paid. It was investment banker-aided fraud. Yeah, not exactly novel. I think it's an interesting one about the modern life, but this goes back to a different time. And this man has this wonderful horse, and it's just a marvelous horse. Got an easy gait and good looking and everything. It just works wonderfully, but also occasionally just gets so he's dangerous and vicious and causes enormous damage and trouble and breaks arms and legs for his rider and so on. And he goes to the vet and say, what can I do about this horse? And the vet says, that's a very easy problem and I'm glad to help you. He says, what should I do? And the man says, the next time your horse is behaving well, sell it. Think of how immoral that is. Haven't I just described what private equity has to do? When private equity has to sell something that's really troublesome, they hire an investment banker. And what does the investment banker do? He makes a projection. I have never seen such expertise in my whole life as is created in making projections in investment banking. There is no business so lousy it can't get a wonderful projection. But is that a great way to make a living, to have phony projections and use it to make money out of people you look right into the eyes of? I would say no. It's not that great a business as a business, casualty insurance. It's a tough game. There are temptations to be stupid in it. It's like banking. I'm all in favor of a good general education, and I think it helps investment performance, and it helps business performance, and it helps one be a better citizen. Some of the things people say are quite memorable, and therefore they're helpful to the mind by the very ease with which they're remembered. And I think you'd be surprised how many bright investment professionals could talk a lot about Aristotle or even people I can't stand. I don't think having a bunch of bankers, all of whom are trying to get rich, leads to good things. I think a banker should be more like an engineer. He's more like into avoiding trouble than he is getting rich.
Yeah, and they could do fine.
They can do fine that way. And I think we had a big mistake when we created a bank where everybody who joins it finds to get rich.
Yeah.
No. I think some people just buy it to keep the stock up. And that, of course, is insane and immoral. But apart from that, it's fine. Well, some people buy their own stock back regardless of price. That's not our system.
We think a lot of share repurchases are idiotic. I mean, yeah.
I was trying to say that more gently.
You've never done it before.
narrowly averted the mistake of being unwilling to pay up at C's Capital. We've gone on and made the same damn mistake several times with respect to marketable securities. We evidently learn very slowly.
It costs us many, many, many billions of dollars, too.
Those are opportunity cost billions. They don't show up in the financial statements, but the amount of money that's been blown by dumb decisions at headquarters at Berkshire Hathaway is awesome.
In spite of being partners for so long, why is Warren so much richer than you?
Well, he got an earlier start. He's probably a little smarter. He works harder. There are not a lot of reasons. Dividends are a very interesting subject. If you count the unnecessary stock trading and the cost of investment advice and the cost of making a lot of errors and the trading costs in and out, I don't think it would be too extreme to say that the total amount that's paid out in dividends is roughly equal to the amount that is wasted in all this trading and investment advice. The net dividends that come to the shareholders are approximately zero. This is a very peculiar way to run a republic. Very few people comment about it.
Yeah, actually, I did in an article some time ago. And
there's been some tension in the economic relationship of the United States and China. I think that tension has been wrongly created on both sides. I think we're equally guilty of being stupid. If there's one thing we should do, it's get along with China, and we should have a lot of free trade with China in our mutual interest. Yeah, but Black-Scholes is what I would call a know-nothing value system. If you don't know anything at all about value compared with price, in other words, if price is teaching you all that can be known, then Black-Scholes on a very short-term basis is a pretty good guess, for what a 90-day option may be worth in some stock or another. The minute you get into longer-term options, where you don't have the know-nothing factor so extreme, it's crazy to use Black-Scholes. People use it just because they want some kind of a mechanical system. At Costco, for instance, within a fairly short period, we issued stock options at 30, and we also issued stock options at 60. And Black-Scholes valued the options we issued at 60 as a strike price, way higher than the options we issued at 30. Well, this is insane.
But we like a certain amount of insanity.
Yeah, well, it's good for Warren, who picked up this extra $120 million. Well, Berkshire's never been very active in commercial real estate. It works better for taxable investors than it does for corporations taxed the way Berkshire is.
Yeah, and the buildings don't go away, but
the owners do. People pay attention to the audited figures, not the underlying reality. So therefore, if the accounting is lousy, the business decisions are lousy. And yet it's perfectly obvious, at least to me, that to say that derivative accounting in America is a sewer is an insult to sewage. And in accounting, you can do things like they do in Italy when they have trouble with the mail. It piles up and irritates the postal employees. They just throw away a few carloads, and then everything flows smoothly thereafter.
Folks. That happened in some unnamed international country.
Yeah, Italy. Yeah, and of course the accounting being deficient enormously contributes to the risks. If you get paid enormous bonuses based on reporting profits that don't exist, you're going to keep doing whatever causes those phony profits to keep appearing on the books. What makes that so difficult is that most of the accounting profession doesn't even recognize how stupidly it is behaving. One of the people in charge of accounting standards said to me, well, this is better, this derivative accounting, because it's mark to market. And don't we want current information? And I said, yes, but if you mark to model and you create the models and your accountants trust your models and you can just report whatever profit you want as long as you keep expanding the positions bigger and bigger and bigger, the way human nature is, that will cause terrible results and terrible behavior. And this person said to me, well, you just don't understand accounting. It's such a rotten way to run a civilization, to make the basic accounting wrong. It is very much like making the engineering wrong when you're building a bridge. When I see reputable people making these perfectly ridiculous arguments to the effect that it's unthinkable that options be expensed,
or it's too difficult to value.
well, because it's too difficult to value or God knows what reason. A lot of them are people you'd be glad to have marry your daughter. And
Yeah,
yet,
because they're rich, for one thing.
yet the truth of the matter is they're somewhere between crazy and crooked. But I don't think they passed this rule requiring changes in marketable securities to go through the income account quarterly. They didn't do that to protect themselves from liability. They just did that for some crazy reason of their own.
Yeah.
You get a bunch of people who are all being drawing a lot of pay out of a big complicated system and rising in it like so many officers in the Army. God knows what they'll do if you put them in a little room by themselves and tell them to invent new accounting standards.
Well, to our auditor, remember that's Charlie talking. And he doesn't but I agree with him 100%. He's 99. He can get away with more than I can get away with.
And it really works in marriage. If you can change yourself instead of trying to change your spouse, that's a good idea.
Charlie's big on lowering expectations.
Absolutely. That's the way I got married. My wife lowered her expectation. If you look at it backwards, hell, we should have bought all the oil in the 30s in the Middle East and taken it over here by tankers and put it in our own ground. Even though that's obvious, are we doing the equivalent of that now? And the answer is basically no. So I think the governmental policy tends to be way behind in terms of rationality. If you take the modern world, where people are trying to teach you how to come in and trade actively in stock. Well, I regard that as roughly equivalent to trying to induce a bunch of young people to start off on heroin. It is really stupid. And when you're already rich, to make your money by encouraging people to get rich by trading. And then there are people on the TV, another wonderful place. And they say, I have this book that will teach you how to make 300% a year. And all you have to do is pay for shipping, and I will mail it to you. How likely is it that a person who had suddenly found a way to make 300% a year would be trying to sell books on the internet to you? It's ridiculous. And yet, I've described modern commerce. Those of you who are about to enter business school or who are there, I recommend you learn to do it our way, but at least until you're out of school, you have to pretend to do it their way. Well, I can't give you a formulaic approach because I don't use one. If you want a formula, you should go back to graduate school. They'll give you lots of formulas that won't work. Yeah, I think you would understand any presentation using the word EBITDA if every time you saw that word, you just substituted the phrase bullshit earnings.
I knew he'd do it sooner or later, folks.
And the man,
he made it through the morning, but never all day.
And the man asked the question also, it says, what remaining big accounting troubles exist? The real Lollapalooza is pension fund accounting and to some extent post-retirement medical liabilities. When people talk about sigmas in terms of disaster potentialities in markets, they're all crazy. They got the idea that bad results in markets would be predicted by Gaussian distributions. And the way they decided outcome was it made everything so easy to compute. They don't follow Gaussian distributions. You have to believe in the tooth fairy to believe that. We've never had any system for being able to make correct judgments on the values of all businesses. We throw almost all decisions into the too hard pile, and we just sift for a few decisions we can make that are easy. That's a comparative process. If you're looking for an ability to correctly value all investments at all times, we can't help you. California has institutionalized fraud, fraudulent chiropractors, fraudulent lawyers, fraudulent what have you, and they put this enormous burden on business, and of course, and then you've got all these lawyers and lobbyists who like the fraud. It's a major problem. And in California, it's gotten so bad that my guess is there will be some reform, even with a two-thirds Democratic legislature.
What would change in terms of the shareholder situation?
Well, that's harder because if you take the worst of the plaintiff's lawyers, half the time they're suing somebody that's behaved terribly. Now, they're suing in a process where a lot of money is paid out, as you say, on a socialized basis and doesn't really go to the people that were hurt. They're like a public scold that gets paid an enormous sum out of the public. The present system is crazy. I don't know how I'd improve it. You could easily improve it if you could count on government being rational and fair. But how do you do that? competency is a relative concept. And what a lot of us need, including the one speaking, what I needed to get ahead was to compete against idiots. And luckily, there's a large supply. Warren, if people weren't so often wrong, we wouldn't be so rich. Everybody wants fiscal virtue, but not quite yet. They're like that guy who felt that way about sex. He was willing to give it up, but not quite yet. I don't like multitasking. I see these people doing 3 things at once, and I think, God, what a terrible way that is to think. Has anybody else got an easy question? I think I've offended enough people.
Right. There's 2 or 3 in the balcony.